Interested in Hyper-V, how it works, how to get it up and running? This video is for you. Okay, so I've got 3 physical servers I've got set up. Currently they are IPs 192.168.0.41, 42, and 43. And in this video, what I'm trying to show you is how to get Hyper-V installed, get a virtual machine running, as well as have the ability to do things like failover or migrations. So let's see how quickly we can get this up and running. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Server Manager on each of these boxes, and I'm going to do add roles and features. Now you'll notice my system has a few errors. That's just because I have it joined to a domain Active Directory, but the domain controllers aren't available because they're actually Hyper-V virtual machines, and Hyper-V doesn't exist right now. So I I'll explain why I did that here in a second. So I'm going to go ahead and do add roles and features. I'm just going to do next here. I'm going to do role based. My boxes are called Hyper-V1, Hyper-V2, Hyper-V3. Do next. I'm going to check Hyper-V. I'll go ahead and let it add the features. It's like PowerShell commandlets and the GUI tool to manage it. But notice on the next page, when I get to features, I'm also going to add failover clustering. Failover clustering is kind of important because that's what's going to let me do things like migrate virtual machines and storage. So I'm going to add the role Hyper-V and the feature failover clustering. Do next, next. I'm going to select, I only have one NIC for right now, that's fine. Allow the server to send and receive live migrations of the virtual machine. For right now, I'm going to leave it at cred SSP because I don't have Active Directory up and running currently. It's actually a virtual machine. Later, you can come back and flip this to Kerberos. For right now, I'm just going to leave it with cred SSP. I'll take the defaults, and I just tend to check this box, which will allow it to restart the machine as needed. I'm going to hit install. And while that's running, I'm going to flip to the other 2 boxes and do the same thing. So Server Manager, add roles and features. Oh, give it a second. There we go, add roles and features. And again, Hyper-V. Oop, wrong one. Hyper-V. Give that a second. And failover clustering. Oh, forget to check my NIC. There it is. Allow this server to send and receive. Check that box, yes, and install. Got one more in here. Add roles and feature. Gotta wait for the bar to finish. I'm impatient. There we go. Hyper-V, add feature, well, add role. Failover clustering. Next, select my NIC. Allow the server to send and receive migrations. Accept the defaults. And install. I'm going to go back to the first box and we'll see where it's at. Oh, looks like it rebooted. Second box is probably getting close. By the time the second box restarts, I'll probably be able to RDP back into the first box. There it is. Third box is installing. And maybe that server's not up quite just yet, but that's fine. We'll have to give that one just a second. So what I'm doing is right now I'm just getting the Hyper-V, the role installed. And technically, even without the failover clustering, Hyper-V is done. It's installed. At that point, I can deploy virtual switches, I can deploy virtual machines, but it's kind of more close to the traditional like VMware Workstation, Oracle VirtualBox, even though it's not the same type of hypervisor, because this still is kind of more of a bare metal, even though I can install Office and other things next to it. So you technically have Hyper-V up and running. That's it. But we're not done. I want to configure a few more things. So we'll give this a second. Hold that thought for just a second. I'll wait for these boxes to come back online, and then I'll walk you through a few adjustments. All right, so now I'm reconnected, but I did have to do a little bit offline, so let me walk you through what I did. So the Hyper-V roles installed, And when I went through that, I marked one of my NICs as I want to use it with Hyper-V. Well, when you do that, I actually got to configure just a little bit more, but under Tools, Hyper-V Manager, because that's now installed. So what I did offline is I went to Hyper-V for each box. I went to Virtual Switch Manager, and I added a new virtual switch. I'm just going to act like I'm going to do this right now. What you want is probably external, so that it basically binds to the physical NIC just like you would physically plugging into the adapter. And I made sure to name these all the same. I called it main. You can see it right above. I selected my NIC. I, in my instance, checked allow management operating system to share this adapter. In a production environment, you might have dedicated management NICs versus virtual switch NICs. For a lab, you probably could combine them. So I checked allow management operations system to share. I'm not currently doing VLANs, although usually even in my lab, I'll do multiple VLAN IDs. For now, I just let it bind as is. And then I hit OK, so I have main now on every one of my hypervisors. So I did that offline. Now, it is extremely important that they are all named the same, because if you ever start to migrate a virtual machine from one box to another, the name needs to match. So that's set up. I currently don't have any virtual machines, but I can spin off new virtual machines. Just to show you this, on each of these, it's roles installed. If I go to Hyper-V, Hyper-V2, and again, virtual switch of main. Now notice I previously had a virtual machine before I recorded on this physical box called DCO2. I removed Hyper-V. I've since re-added it and it sees it. Otherwise I could have imported it anyway. But I'm going to go ahead and go to settings on this one. And I'm going to look at the network adapter, configuration error. I'm going to flip it to my main virtual switch. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and power that on. I'm going to connect and start it. While that's running, I'm going to flip over to my third box, close, tools, Hyper-V. Again, I'm going to validate I have my main switch. I did that offline. There it is. It's there. Same thing here. I've got another virtual machine that I previously had before this recording. I'm going to edit it to use the main switch. There we go. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and start this one as well. Now these two are domain controllers. And in my lab environment, what I would do is have two domain controllers on separate physical boxes. That way, even if a Hyper-V instance goes down, I still have my Active Directory domain up. And so what I'm going to do is once these are online, I'm going to validate the IP address I'm using. And I'm going to point my Hyper-V boxes at the domain controllers for DNS. They're technically already joined to the domain, but they're not using it currently. The errors I got in the machine manager were actually due to Kerberos. If I go to manageability, Kerberos. Reason being is they're not pointing at the domain controller. So, I'm over on this box for myself. And here we go. Validate my IP address. This is 32, which means my other one is 31. So all I'm going to do is go to my adapter, right click on the network icon here, change adapter settings, and I'm going to point my Hyper-V physical hosts. Oh, that's my physical box. Too many windows. Here we go. I'll just do this. Network and sharing center. And I'm going to go to this connection, properties, IPv4, and I'm going to change DNS to be, for my environment, 31 and 32. Close. I'm going to do the same thing on all three boxes. Change adapter. That can happen occasionally. If you ever get this, I'll show you a different way of getting to it. You can also do the old school control panel. Switch to small icon and then go under network and sharing center here, and you'll be able to click on the adapter. Good old Microsoft. Speaking of which, when I'm offline, I did have an issue where it dropped my gateway and I had to retype it before it would take it. So if you're finding like it has an IP but you can't ping or reach out to anything, reset your gateway and it'll probably fix that. 31, 32, okay, okay. And I got one more box to do this on. And then what I'm also going to do next is I'm going to reboot my hosts one more time. The reason I'm going to do that is I want the computer accounts to have Kerberos tickets, because even though we're used to log onto boxes, I want the hypervisor host to do as well. And again, that's picking up from my machine. So network, control panel, small, network and sharing, virtual Ethernet, properties. There we go. 192.168.0.31, 192.168.0.32. Okay, close, close. Okay, so all my boxes now are pointing to my domain controllers. Now notice I've got one running on my third host. I'm going to go ahead and reboot this box. Let's put it as planned. Restart anyway. That will auto restart the virtual machine when it comes back up. I'm not going to restart my second Hyper-V instance because I need one domain controller to stay online while the other two restart. So I'm going to go ahead and restart number one as well. So then after my third and first hypervisors rebooted, my third one came back online. And I made sure that the domain controller that's on it is back up and running. And then I went ahead and restarted my second hypervisor. And again, at this point, it's back up. Second virtual machine's up and running too. So at this point, I have virtual machines running. I have two domain controllers, but there's one more thing I want to show you, and that's the failover cluster. So let's go ahead. Instead of going under Hyper-V Manager here, I'm going to open Failover Cluster Manager. And when I open this, there's nothing currently created. I'm going to create a failover cluster. So for this, I'm going to enter my three boxes, which is Hyper-V1, Hyper-V2, Hyper-V3. I know, super original naming. I'm going to give it a cluster name of test. Well, actually, we'll call this, I'll just call it, we'll do Hyper-V test. I'll give it an IP of 40, because I have 41, 42, and 43 as my physical hosts. So I'm just going to do 40. And the first time you run this wizard, it will also walk you through some validations. I'll actually show you that after I go through this. So I'm going to do next. Add all eligible storage to the cluster. I don't have any because I'm just using local disks. Go ahead and let this go. Notice it's creating that cluster as a computer account in Active Directory. And hopefully this will complete and be successful. And I'm going to show you the validation after the fact. Mine's going to throw a few errors because I'm just running with a single NIC, as well as it'll throw an error that I don't have the latest Windows Defender patch. There we go. So it's completed, finish. Now I can see my cluster. I can also validate the cluster after the fact. Normally you do this when you first create it. So run all tests, yes. And hopefully let's see if the report matches what I think it's going to say. Takes just a second, and then we'll open this up as an HTML document. And I'll have to allow blocked content to be able to view it properly. There it goes. That quorum thing, that flash by, we'll see that in the report. That's not a big deal. There we go, almost there, and network communication tests are taking just a second. That's actually fairly normal. And so then after this is done, I'll open it and just kind of show what the report would look like. Then we're going to test something with migrating a virtual machine just to see if I actually have this all set up correctly. The one thing I'm not showing is things like iSCSI, fiber channel, shared storage. If I get enough requests, I can show that, but that's kind of its own different beast. So okay, I'm going to do allow block content. This is just showing me how my cluster is doing. And really, it's going to be under network, validate network communication, single NIC, only one pair of network. That's what I'm expecting. The system configuration is software. They're all missing Windows Defender Antivirus, the most recent patch. And then no local disk, or no shared storage, which is expected. So finish. Now I'm going to close out a failover clustering, and I'm going to flip back to Hyper-V for a second. Now watch this. So I have no virtual machines over here. I technically can add my other boxes. Hyper-V 2. I can add Hyper-V 3. Let's see if I can view 2. 2 has DCO1, 3 has, or DCO2, and 3 has DCO1. I'm going to right click on this and do move. Next. I'm going to move the virtual machine, including its storage, just to test to see if this works. It's going to ask me where to go. I'm going to move it to Hyper-V 1. Move it to a single location. Yep. I'm just going to create a folder on the root of the C drive just for simplicity. You'll see this in a second. I'll just call it VMs. The reason I'm doing this is as soon as I hit browse, it's going to want me to put it somewhere. Next, finish. This will take just a second because I am moving both the RAM and the storage, and oh, credentials supplied not. Oh, yep, that's fine. Let's try this. So I'm gonna, since it's on 3, this is probably just the way I'm doing Kerberos right now. Let me sign off 3, sign back into 3. That is with the domain administrator. This is just a test lab, and I'm gonna get ready to blow it away to do my Proxmarks recordings. Let me validate I'm logged in. Now I'm just going to kick off the migration on this side real quick. Let the bar finish loading. There it goes. Hyper-V. Migrate. Next. It's going to go to Hyper-V 1. Yep. Browse. Yeah, this is why I created the folder. It browses over like this. We're going to do VMs, select. Next, finish. Let's see if we get the same error. Performing the moves, so far so good. And again, this will take just a second. Couple things to note here. If I had anything specific to this host on the VM, it would not migrate. Like when I installed Windows Server, I had the ISO on the box and it was mounted as a CD-ROM. Well, if that same ISO doesn't exist in the same location on the next box, it won't migrate. So you have to have the right networks in place, right settings. You can't have attached like USB drives, ISO images, things like that. And outside of that, this should complete. I'm going to be quiet and let this finish, and I'll just fast forward so you can see that the migration hopefully does complete successfully. And then at that point, we've got Hyper-V across 3 physical boxes with the ability to do memory and storage vMotion. I shouldn't call it vMotion because that's technically vSphere, but that's what I like calling it. I'm currently moving DCO1. So just to show you that this is moving, and the domain controller stays online during the migration. All right, so notice the migration's done. Network connectivity still up. If I flip over to 1, there it is. Ta-da! So Hyper-V, there you have it. So simply adding the role, also adding the failover cluster feature, that will help me do the migrations. And then I tend to prefer still having Active Directory as virtual machines on these, so I kind of offline installed those, but the failover clustering is super simple to set up with Active Directory. It's technically possible without it, but it's Hyper-V. If you want to do a Windows installation, which may make sense in a home lab if you're fighting compatibility with drivers, that might be one of the reasons I would do a Hyper-V based lab. But again, keep in mind, if all you have is a laptop or a desktop, just use Oracle VirtualBox or VMware Workstation. You don't have to have a dedicated lab environment with a Type 1 hypervisor. But if you are, Proxmox, vSphere, Hyper-V, great opportunities. This video hopefully helped you get more comfortable with Hyper-V.